Okay, we're live. So hello everyone and welcome to this second webinar on NR Plus this year, and welcome from the DECT Forum. My name is Roel Ottink. I work for DECT Forum, and we have one speaker today, same speaker as last time. It's Juho Pirskanen, and Juho is Principal System Engineer at Wirepas and one of the main architects of the DECT NR Plus technology. Also present in the background is Jari Hämäläinen from Wirepas, who will support us later on when we come to the questions. The webinar will be recorded and made available to all who have registered on our website, and the slides will also be available on the DECT Forum website. Then we also have an FAQ, which you can also find there. I think that's all the notes that I had, so I hand over to Juho.
Okay, so hello everyone from my behalf also. So today we are talking about DECT NR access and application profiles. I will give an overall view of what is there and why they are there, and what other technical features and capabilities of those. You will also find the then more information in, for example, just by browsing the edge specifications. But I give an overall glimpse of or overall view of those, and you get the better understanding how we have designed the system and designed the access application profiles on top of the core specifications. So when we go to the motivation part, so if you are familiar with the DECT NR core specifications, which I refer this standard series 103636, so there's an overview, physical layer, MAC, DLC and convergence layer specifications. So from parts 1 to 5. So there is a high variety of capabilities in all protocol layers. Physical layer supporting multiple numeral losses, different bandwidths, different data rates, and so forth. MAC supporting different kind of access schemes, like random access and scheduled access, and then in DLC and CVC layers we have different functionalities. So they have been specified to support, and also in the part 2 we have many different frequency bands. So those all has been taken into account that okay, there's a lot of implementation possibilities to develop different kind of products and go from sufficiently like first release or first round of implementations to go even further with more complex implementations and more sophisticated implementations, but also thinking that there's different use cases that might require different capabilities. And here why we have been defining then the access and application profiles. The basic understanding is that we need to define the minimum configurations that all devices shall support in given access profile and application profile. It gives the baseline for conformance testing, basically saying that okay, what kind, if you want to have this kind of use case device for certain use case, this is the minimum set of features that you are supporting, and then that then turns to be a way of providing interoperability between different products. And currently, basically, we have published 3 versions or 3 different sets of application profiles. The first one is the overview. Basically, it's a cover sheet of others. And then we have two technical application and access profiles. The first is the access profiles for smart metering, smart cities, and smart buildings. So developed in those use cases in mind. Of course, the same configuration could be used in other use cases as well. If the configuration meets the or the profile meets the use case requirements, but it basically provides the requirements and recommendations for smart metering, city and buildings, and considers all the protocol layers: physical layer, MAC, DLC, and CVG. And then we have an application profile for IPv6. So the basic understanding here is that the IPv6 anyhow is very important, and the IPv6 can be seen as an application for radio protocols. So the radio protocols are agnostic for the data content, and IPv6 is in that sense, even though it's from the complete network internet network point of view, it's a networking layer, but from the radio communication point of view, it's looks application. The DECT 2020 new radio doesn't really distinguish whether it's an IPv6 packet or something else. But here in this recommendation, we recommend the features and operations and protocols, how to best integrate the IPv6 technology and protocols in DECT 2020 network, especially in mind mesh networking and large-scale mesh networks. So those are the basically what we have currently, and we expect that new application and access profiles will follow when productization goes further in different product areas. So then let's look more details on the access profile for the smart metering and city and buildings. So basically, the first thing is that, of course, you need to, let's say, ensure that devices are operating, let's say, in same frequencies, and also that the channelization is same for all the devices. So the frequency bands, band 1 is for CEPT and Australia, CEPT referring to Europe and other countries that are members of the CEPT, like Turkey and so forth. And then there is a band 4, which is US and Canada and Latin America. It's the this operating band at the 900 megahertz area. So this 900 megahertz area in the ISM band in US, 28 megahertz. And then we have a band 9, also US, Canada, Latin America, which is the frequency band, which is like a USBCS band, having 10 megahertz on 1.9 gigahertz area. So now we have here you can see on the right hand side what is the channel bandwidth. So 1.7 megahertz channel bandwidth, and then the absolute channel numbers, which then based on the part 2 reflects to absolute center frequencies of the channels. So those are all defined, and now they are in all cases in optimum manner, so that they don't overlap between each other. And for example, in DECT core band, they are aligned with the legacy DECT channelization, and we have 11 channel altogether, and same for example US 900 megahertz. We have a bit more channels, but a few more, but and then that we don't interfere the neighboring bands, so that there's enough guards to attenuate the transmitted signal, so that it doesn't interfere any other frequency bands. Then we have defined the maximum TX power. So there's 4 options. So the device can be from 23 dBm to 10 dBm. okay, there's a regulation limitation that in US PCS band, so this band 4, you can only operate with the maximum of 21 dBm, but and actually we are working on the little bit changing the regulation to better meet this 21 dBm there, but basically these are the frequency bands there. Then if we look the physical layer, as said, the numerology is the mu and beta values 1, and the channel bandwidth is the 1.7 megahertz. What we have also defined is that the HARC operation needs to be dynamic. One process for single radio link. So, for example, in figure you can see that okay, the center device, this RDFT-PT routing device, has now 4 parallel HARC processes running on. One from between the from receiving from the sink or RDFT, and one from this 2, 3, and 4. And so 4 parallel processes are required. So there can be multiple retransmissions from different directions coming. And if you think about then why I'm saying dynamic, so in some other time instant, the configuration of the HARC processes is, for example, like here, that it has been partly changed to the different devices. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 4 parallel processes. The MCS is that everybody has to support the MCS1 as it has a better, much better efficiency to the spectrum compared to the MCS0. But the MCS0 is then used to send the ACNAC feedback. So basically, when the receiver has received the packet, it sends using MCS0 with the 1 subslot length, the ACNAC feedback, and basically the transmission only is the PCC content, not PDS, the PDC at all. So only the PCC, so only the feedback is coming with the minimum length. Of course, if it has to send something else, it may then use MCS1 and longer packet. Then we have a transmission length, which is adaptive from 200 microseconds with the 200 microseconds granularity up to 8 subslots, so 1.6 millisecond as a maximum length, and the minimum maximum transport block size is 1,864 bits. And here you can see in the right corner the supported MCSs. So from 32 bits to 1,864 bits. And of course, as the MAC specification requires, so basically the MAC selects the transport block size depending on the available data in the buffer, so that the padding is minimized. And when we think about the MCS selection, so basically the design has been that we support the MCS1, providing the most robust but efficient operation for each link. So not hitting or requiring the maximum throughputs from each link, but requiring the maximum reliability. And this now provides the data rate of 1.1 megabits. 1.1 megabits when for the MAC layer, so taking all the physical layer overheads out. And of course, it's a single TX and RX operation, so no requirements for RX diversity or MIMO, which makes sense when we are talking about IoT and this kind of smart metering and smart city applications. Okay, then when looking the MAC, so basically the system operation is the mesh to having the multi-hopping and the wide area coverage. Basically, all the devices and all the device has to have this operating channel selection. So we basically have a dynamic selection of the operating channels, which means that the mesh networking is spread to the multiple channels on that given band, and in each location, the device or the router devices, RDFT-PTs, are selecting the channel where the interference and the load is or the channel load is the lowest. And no fixed channel assignments for the RDFTs or RDFT-PTs. So dynamic operation needs to be supported. Network beacon transmission is expected to be or is supported by the router devices. The transmission period is 1 second. So every routing device is sending every second the network beacon so that other devices can detect fast these routers and discover the possible routes to the sink. And then what we have also defined is the synchronized cluster beacon transmissions in this application profile, so that we use the MAC specification allowed TX period of 8 seconds. So every router is every 8 seconds sending a cluster beacon containing those random access parameters, and the maintaining timing with other RDFTs, and so that basically the timings of the cluster beacon is shown here. Basically, you can see in the right figure, you have one device transmitting and one channel as these green boxes, the cluster beacon with the 8 second periodicity, and then you have other cluster beacons transmitted nearby, and they are like equally divided in the time with the 8 second period, and those are also transmitted with the 8 second periodicity. So the purple color is another beaconing or another router beaconing, and the yellow is another in the same channel. So this ensures that we don't have cluster beacons colliding in the radio neighborhood between each other when they are arranged this manner, and also they support the synchronization. So of course the clocks are drifting, but they can adjust the timings between each other so that they don't go overlapping each other. So avoiding this cluster beacon interference. And other devices can monitor the neighboring RDs and or RDFTs by of course receiving the timing information from the network beacon. They can find the cluster beacon, or when they have received received one cluster beacon, they know the timing of when the next time the cluster beacon is transmitted. So that's the basic requirement for the devices. Then going further, so basically the power control is mandated for the implementations. So the power control is used for all the steps from -40 dBm up to the maximum transmission power of the device, and the application profile now defines that the initial power is so that when the device is measuring the cluster beacon power, it makes the path loss estimate of what is the path loss to the receiver, and targets the power to the -88 dBm level, which is a strong level, signal level for setting for the MCS1. And basically then if there's a transmission errors, it's expected that the transmitter is adjusting based on the packet error rate. And then the next stop selection and the mobility is based on the lowest router cost. So the people or the radio devices are calculating the cost, resulting that the dynamic routes towards the sink, and supporting both environmental changes. So basically when some link is bad, changes to bad, whatever reason, the device may select a new route dynamically to the sink, and also based on the load balancing, and then of course based on the mobility. So basically, if the here in the second example, the left side has the bad link, it changes, but also if the device is moving in the environment, it will change to the other router when it loses the connection to the previous one. So basically, this gives the dynamic mesh operation without let's say like fixed planning or fixed channelization and so forth, and how the routes are developed. So the system is capable of changing the routes and based on the environment. And for example, if the sinks or some routers start to malfunction or go out of power, the network can adjust itself and route the data with the new routes. Then basically the random access transmissions are used for transmitting the data. It's used for both uplink and downlink transmissions. So for uplink random access transmissions, the RATS configuration is included in cluster beacon message, and other devices may send the association request based on that information. It's actually also included in the network beacon messages. So even if they receive the network beacon, they can immediately send the cluster beacon on the correct channel. Basically, the random access period is configured to be the full time period. At least that's allowed. It may be shorter, but basically the device is listening constantly its own random access resource, the router. And then when the device associates, like in the figure, sending the association request in the F1, so the frequency 1, it also includes its own random access resource that is used, what it's receiving, so that the parent or the device can send the downlink messages to the received RATS transmission. So this basically means that the downlink may go to the different channel compared to the uplink. So of course the acknowledgements goes to the same channel, but when for example the uplink packet is going, this device is sending uplink packet to the next hop. It's the next hop receives the data and sends the acknowledgement, but when there's a downlink data coming from the sink to this device, then the radio device, this FTPT, sends the data directly to its members' random access resources and gets the acknowledgement. So basically the downlink transmission starts to compete the same resources as the uplink transmissions from these other members. So the response window is short, 4 slots for the HARC ACNAC transmission. So basically the timeout, if there's no ACNAC comes in roughly 4 slots, is for 1.6 millisecond timeout. But of course the response should come already after one slot or 3 subslots containing in the third subslot after the end of the transmission. So the HARC feedback comes very fast. And then when there is a response from the MAC layer, so for example association request, and then we have a response, association response, the transmitter waits maximum 10 milliseconds for the response. So the router has more time to prepare, let's say, process the request, for example, the association request, run the deciphering and check the integrity, and then create the MAC message, cipher and integrity protector message, and then send it as a response to that. The LPT duration is defined to be 1 slot, so it's a bit longer than the minimum that the MAC specification mandates. So here basically the thinking has been that we can measure a little bit longer. We are not optimizing the latency, but we are optimizing the reliability and the capacity, so that we don't transmit on top of the acknowledgements, for example, other transmitters' acknowledgements. So if somebody has been transmitting a packet, when the LPT is started, it cannot be considered, that channel cannot be considered free in typical case when there is a data transmission coming and the HARQ feedback coming. And then the random pack of parameters are optimized for spectrum sharing rather than maximum throughput. So basically, it is CV min and CV max which are defining the minimum and maximum backoff values in case of successful transmission, or how big the backoff is growing. We are using the long values so that the devices are rather sharing the spectrum than grabbing the spectrum most aggressively manner. Which seems it's like quite reasonable in case of, if we think about these use cases currently, which are not extremely delay sensitive. So like smart metering and smart buildings, we expect that the delays of tens or hundreds of milliseconds are not necessary, rather than delays of let's say few hundred milliseconds in multi-hop systems would be quite nice, for example, for uplink data. Then in the security side, we use the MAC security, what is defined in the standard for all transmissions, including the network and cluster beacon. So basically, everything is integrity protected and ciphered. So that was the MAC part. Then a few words on the higher layers. So basically, in the DLC and the routing, we use the DLC service type 2, which is the ARQ mode. So basically, when we get the let's say the HARQ feedback from the physical layer in the transmitter side, it's when there's a positive feedback, then the DLC layer is removing the transmitted PDU from the read-TX buffer. But if it doesn't get the feedback, it may retransmit the packet again from the DLC layer, so that if there's no HARQ feedback, or the routes are changing during the transmission, or the connection to completely lost to the who was the original intended receiver, the retransmission happens on the DLC layer for those PDUs when the next hop is refined again. In the routing side, basically in uplink, we use the standard hop by hop routing. So the device is sending the data to its next hop and so forth towards the sink. And in the downlink, we use the selective floodings, as this is now release 1 based application profile. So in the release 2 application profile version, we will then address potentially the other improvements that are coming in release 2 specification. And then in the routing PDU, the transfer delay and the hop count fields are included in the routing PDU. So basically, when data comes to the backend from the devices, the backend can see what is the hop count, how many hops the data has been gone through, and what kind of transfer delay. So basically, there's a capability of calculating backwards when actually this data was created, even though if the data there's some transfer delay. So and different PDUs are coming in different times from different devices. So those can be set in the correct timeline in the backend. CVG layer, the maximum STU size 1500 bytes from the application layer. So this is like a bit larger than the the IPv6 packet size. And then segmentation and reassembly is used. Basically the CVG segmentation is done so that the PDU size, of course, is flexible, but it has to fit to the MAC PDUs that were defined. So this 1864 bytes, bits, 1864 bits, and then taking the defined headers, MAC PDUs and routing headers in the count. So that gives you can the implementation can calculate backwards that what is the PDU size that they can send. And then it's mandatory to support also the endpoint multiplexing with use of data AP. So basically, single mesh network can have multiple traffic or data, multiple application in the system. So there can be like sensors from smart city, that some sensor data is some format, temperature sensors might have some data format, and then other data format might be, for example, some other presence detector sensor or so forth, just for example. But different data endpoints are available in and can be company specific or like standard base specific in the ETSI registry defined currently, and those can be more values can be defined during course of implementation of different applications. Then the application profile, the IPv6 application profile. So basically, the motivation and target of this work was to enable efficient IPv operation in large-scale mesh network, as I said earlier. So without even this, of course, you could put the protocol stacks are agnostic for the IPv6, and we have already endpoint values for IPv6, and in that sense, the data can go through. But when we think about IPv6, especially in the mesh network, there's certain functionalities that are perhaps quite capacity consuming, and some topics needs to be considered. And then here the design has been to support the mesh networks with multiple gateways and border routers, and different architects of backend routers, support efficient mobility between RDFTs, i.e. the sinks, and gateways and border routers, so that needs to be also supported. And of course, the idea has been that the different access profiles, in this case, the access profile for smart metering and buildings, so that radio configuration can directly use this application IPv6 configuration, and those definitions can work together with this one. And of course, you might have later other application profile or this access profiles, different radio configurations, which are again using the this IPv6 application profile for their purposes. So basically, what this defines is that the TechNR network is as a single hop for the IPv6. So basically, the IPv6 sees the from node or from the RD device to the backend or to the backend router or border router, from node to the border router, as there would be a single hop or in the IP level. So it doesn't recognize that how many routers or how many routing decisions on DECT 2020 network there is. So you can look here from the this figure. So basically, device which is routing the data, the PDU goes up to the routing service and not to the IPv6 layer. And IPv6 address is not used for the routing messages inside the DECT 2020 network. So that was the first decision, and what this application profile does. Then what the network needs to provide is the reliable transmission of this 1,280 byte IPv6 packet, which is the packet size that all IPv6 routers has to support. As a CBG payload, the DECT 2020 DLC routing of the transmission and destination devices using the DECT long RD IDs. So the routing happens with the long RD IDs, and the long RD IDs address information is received from the PDUs and are given to the IPv6 profile implementation. And then there's a requirement for indication of the sync chains and the long RD ID of the sync. And then there's a configuration data distribution support needed for all the devices. And this configuration distribution was introduced in release 2 for to the specification. So if you look the have seen the previous presentation of from DECT forum regarding the release 2, you get the understanding of the configuration distribution. But the basic idea there is that the configuration is given by the parent node or the next hop node directly, and you don't need to fetch the configuration from external outside of from the sink or gateway or from the external network. You get the configuration directly from your next hop neighbor device where you are associated. And basically the network addressing architecture is such that well, single network can be behind multiple border routers or backend routers, as you can see here in the figure. They are simply configured, the nodes, DECT 2020 nodes are configured in the same network ID. The radio device supports multiple IPv6 addresses. You can use global unique addresses. You may use the unique local addresses or link local unicast IPv addresses. And the link local address is the single DECT 20 NR plus network. So basically, when you have configured all the devices are configured in the same, and they are part of the same network in the same network address, network ID in the from the DECT 2020 network, they also are part of the link local address scope in the network. Then basically the prefix and address configuration. So basically the border routers and backend routers can obtain their IP addresses, including prefixes, with the standard IPv6 methods. So those are just operating as IPv6 routers. And each radio device configures its IPv address locally. And basically, if we think about the IPv6 address, we have the IPv6 prefix, 64 bits, and the interface identifier of 64 bits. And what we do basically is that we have defined it so that this auto configuration means that when the device receives the router info ID from the network and cluster beacon message and makes the association, it can obtain the RDFT's long RD ID, so the syncs ID, and then it has its own long radio device ID, 32 bits, and put those together, you get 64 bits, and you basically get this interface identifier. And then the content, CDD content, so configuration distribution, gives the IPv6 prefix information. And this means then that router changes under the single sink are not visible to the border router or backend router. And when route changes to different sinks, the IPv6 address changes. That's why the protocol stack needs to indicate that, okay, now I have different long sink address and the long RD address. So that makes our nodes or the device IP address change. And of course, we expect that then applications currently are supporting this kind of address changes. So they will send the message to the application server indicating that now the IPv6 address has changed. And then this updates also the downlink routing tables in the border routers and backend routers. So basically, when the device is moving to the different sinks, of course, the downlink traffic needs to be routed to the correct gateway and correct sink. So this now happens automatically when this application message goes to the update to the IPv6 address. In uplink, then the border router information is also updated in downlink. So the configuration distribution content for the IPv6 is quite essential. So the CDD provides the prefix or the full IP addresses. Both can be provided. And so the prefix is used for the IPv6 address generation. So basically the prefix what the border router and backend router are having, that prefix is provided in the CDD information from the sink to the network from the in part of the CDD content. So basically, when the association happens, the device can obtain the CDD content from this net hop and automatically obtain the prefix that it needs to be used. And then there is a possibility to indicate these full addresses. So basically, CDD can be used to provide this different addresses. So you can provide the DNS server, application server addresses, or for example, device management address and so forth. So you have a different kind of address possibilities that you can identify. And then it indicates the prefix of full IPv headers for the header compression as a content identifiers. So basically, when we get this configuration data information, we can also do the IPv header compression by basically this RFC 6282. So basically, these two options are supported, so or needs to be supported from this RFC. And it can be header compression can be used for the source and destination, or either one addresses. And basically, there's two modes from this RFC mandated. So mode 1 and mode 2. And in mode 1, the prefix part is edited, so basically removed from the IPv header, and the 64-bit IDD is included in the packet. So if you think about the uplink packet, you might have only the server's address there. Then there is the mode 3, which contains two options. So the first one is that the context defines the prefix, and the IDD is obtained from the sinks RDs and long RD IDs. So basically, this is the downlink packet coming from the and the header compression. So basically, the prefix is the context ID, and then the RD obtains, puts its own sinks and RD address to the rest of the address. So basically, the whole header is removed. Or then there's the option 2, where the IP address is the context defines the full address. So basically, not only the prefix but also the interface ID of that internet host. And then the different 16 different contexts per RD is mandated to be supported. So there's a good opportunities to header compress. But I think one topic that we have to remember here is that as we have the segmentation capabilities of the data and we have the capabilities of transmitting the complete IPv6 packet, basically the header compression becomes like a capacity improvement of the whole system. So all devices and the networks can always transfer the full IPv6 packets. And of course, you might have a case, for example, that the context and prefixes are not yet updated and by the gateways, and the device needs to send the full IPv6 packets in, for example, towards the server. Then final topics, small remarks before we close or have the end of the presentation. So also some additional functions or definitions need to be done. So basically, not used functions are from the IPv6, so the duplicate address detection. So because we have this method of creating IPv6 addresses, they cannot be really duplicates. Neighbor adversion or solidization of IPv6, that's not needed because the neighbors are learned by the devices directly. And same goes to the router advertisements, also solidization. So basically the routing and so forth, the functionalities are part of the DEC 2020 protocol. Then on the IPv6, the profile expects that the multicasts are static in nature, where the border routers is configured to forward known IPv multicasts to the DEC 2020 network, and radio devices are pre-configured to listen certain multicast address. And the basic definition here is that the different radio devices are not aware of different other devices' multicast memberships. So basically, when there's a multicast packet coming from the backend or from the internet to the border router, and the border router passes that packet to the DEC 2020 network, as there is devices wanting to hear, it goes as a downlink broadcast to the other devices, and then the devices just filter by themselves whether they want to receive that multicast packet or not. But from DEC network, it goes as a broadcast to every device. And then under that, border router and SIG. And then, of course, the security, it's essential. So basically, we expect that the devices are supporting this TTLS 1.2 over UDP. So basically, the profile is supporting both UDP and TCP, but of course, the main motivation in this kind of application is to utilize UDP. Oh, there's actually typo, should be UDP, not UPD. And with the DTLS connection ID is expected to support. And requirement for this, of course, is that you don't want to restart the DTLS when the address changes due to mobility in DEC 2020 network, so that you can continue with the existing DTLS session. And that's for all. And it went a bit longer than planned, but I think we have still now good time for questions and comments.
Yes, we do indeed, Juho. So thank you very much for this informative and detailed presentation. There are a few questions, and the first one was, and that's about the transmit power. What means class 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Oh, okay. So the class basically means, well, it's just a term. It means basically that what is the maximum transmitting power of that device. So if it's so if it's class 4 device, basically the maximum transmission power is 10 dBm, what it can transmit. And of course, there's then in the power scale, there is transmission power from -40 to 10 dBm, whatever the link is requiring. The power control is adjusting that one. And then, of course, if you have a class 3 device, you have a maximum power of 19 dBms. And then you have a transmission power, it's adjusted based on the power control from -40 to 19 dBm, depending on the links. And there's perhaps the regulation, for example, 21 dBm is allowed in this, or it's like the target power for this band 9. And then there's some implementations that are supporting 19 dBms. You could think about that, okay, 10 dBm is, for example, devices then that are like battery operated or doesn't want to use all the or power is like limited so that they don't want to use the maximum these higher transmission powers.
Thanks, you. But where are these classes defined? Are they?
They are defined in the part. They are defined in the part 2. So the if you go to the TS 103.636-2, which is the radio transmission and reception specification, those are the power where the power classes are defined, and then in the MAC specification, the device is indicating its capability in the radio device capability, that what is the maximum power that it can use. And then, of course, you need, basically this means that you need to have implementations that can adjust or understand that there is a devices with different transmission powers.
Okay.
So not all the devices have an equal maximum necessarily.
Very good. Then we have a question. As more profiles are defined, will we be able to have a network of devices with mixed profiles?
Well, that depends on how the profiles are defined. So, of course, if you have profiles and whether there is a requirement for that. So the intention, of course, is that certain devices in certain profiles are able to talk together. If you need to define a new profile, for example, now we have defined, if we think about this smart access profile, smart metering and city and buildings, you could create potentially another profile which is having more capabilities, but it should have also these capabilities. So in theory, yes, but depends on how the profile is defined and whether there is this kind of requirement that they have to work together in the same system. So if there is, then yes, but then they don't necessarily be, because let's say there's no need that this kind of device types are in the same system.
Right, I understand. Could happen, of course, in the future, but let's see how that develops. Maybe connected to that question then, so you talked today about smart metering, city and buildings profile and IPv6 profile, but are there other profiles being worked on?
So currently ETSI is working on the, or started to work on new profile that part 4, which is the profile for audio and voice. So that work has started and to be progressed in the future.
Okay. Then a question here from Matthew Rowe. Are you expecting to create a profile for low power devices, for example, battery powered IoT sensors?
So currently the plan or the thinking in ETSI has been that when we have now introduced in release 2 this like new features for the like low power or low power devices. So we have this, if you remember our previous webinar on this sending data without association and having this kind of device, long devices that are associated but they are pulling the data. The intention is that we are updating this access profile, for example, the smart metering and city profile, so that those type of devices can operate then on this same network. So basically, this we are expecting that this access profile is now in the release 2, then updated with the release 2 features. So indeed, yes.
Okay. Hope that answers the question. Then we have another one. If the intention is to use IPv6 over the top of the smart building profile, is it a matter of just combining the two profiles together?
Yes, that was the intention. So basically having an implementation that from the radio point of view uses this profile as a part of the implementation, and then you have the definitions from here also implemented in that same device, and then yes, you have IPv6 capable device that is, for example, for the smart buildings, and the data application is then IPv6. And of course, whatever protocols are on top of IPv6, like Matter and so forth.
Okay, and maybe connecting to that, the IPv6 profile, are there applications and use cases for this defined yet?
So we expect that there is this DECT forum has this smart city and building interest group launched, and there our understanding is that or my understanding basically is that then the application would be Matter, which requires the IPv6 support for the lower layers.
Okay, I don't think there are more questions from the participants.
Okay, and just to add that there's of course other applications that may use IPv6 directly for the IoT services, and but the Matter is the, let's say, the clear where there is interest to utilize that.
Yeah. Okay, I have one last question here. Then you mentioned conformance testing. What is happening in TC-DECT on that point?
So the conformance testing is ongoing. The specification development is ongoing. We have two specifications coming. One is the radio transmission and reception, so the physical layer testing, and then we have another specification for the protocol testing. And in both, we are looking, of course, the application profiles as creating so that we can test the functionality that these application profiles are defining. Of course, the conformance test may also cover a little bit more than those, but at least these would be covered. The radio protocols and the physical layer, and the target for publishing those, the first application is to be done during the summer this year, so in 3 to 4 months, slightly depending on the Etsy publishing timeline, but and capability. But basically, those should be approved in next face-to-face meeting in early June in Etsy TC-DECT.
Excellent. That sounds good. So thanks again very much for the presentation and your answers to the questions. We've almost filled the hour, so that was very good timing. To everyone, we haven't yet defined a date or subject for further webinars. We're talking about a customer case in industry that we could present, but it will likely be after the summer. So keep a lookout for the announcements on the side of the DECT forum on this. And then I'd like to thank you all for participating today and wish you a very nice evening. Thanks and goodbye.